If you didn't watch the full 3.5 hour live stream where I built the FlyPro XJaguar, here is my more reasonable length review video. And since I have done a full build of this copter now, I have a little bit more perspective of it than some of the reviews I do where I've kind of just looked at it, just basically looked at it and given you my impressions. But I will tell you that I haven't flown this yet. So the tuning video and the flight review, that's coming. And in fact, not this weekend, but next, I have scheduled a wrap-up of this latest batch of, well, I've been calling them ready-to-fly racing copters, but the XJaguar is not really a ready-to-fly because you have to put it together. But then again, it's not really a kit because the way the electronics go together, it's almost no soldering whatsoever. So anyway, I'll be having a wrap-up video of all of the quadcopters I've been looking at recently. The HobbyWow Shuriken X1, the Quad Questions QQ190 ready-to-fly, the FlyPro XJaguar, and one more that is supposed to be coming. And that's coming next weekend. But for now, let's take a closer look at the FlyPro XJaguar. As far as the build goes, this was not the easiest build I've ever done, but that's not the fault of the electronics as much as it is the fault of the way they've built the frame. They want to get this really super cool XJaguar THUNDERCATS thing going on. And this part, actually, the frame was the fiddliest part of putting this whole thing together. The electronics were pretty easy. The main boards all snap together using micro connectors. They just stack on top of one another, so it's basically set the board down, put the spacer on, set the board down, put the spacer on, set the board down. And all of the accessories plug into micro connectors as well. You can see right here is the camera, and out here on the back is the receiver wire. So for a beginner, this might be a way of getting into a taste of building, but without some of the hurdles like knowing how to solder really well, for example, that are required to get you into the hobby. That's not to say that you can build this copter without being able to solder at all. Although, frankly, if you're going to get into this hobby, you really do, you need to learn to solder, right? You're not going to do well in this hobby if you can't solder at all. But as far as somebody who maybe wanted to get into the hobby with like a ready to fly and then learn to solder later, this may not be the best choice because, after all, you do have to solder the motors on. And, if there was one thing you were going to need to know how to solder on a copter, it's certainly the motors, right? You got to have the ESCs connected well with the motors. The motors will stutter and the copter will drop out of the sky. And so it's not like this is just, a telemetry connection where if it doesn't work, well, maybe you don't know what your VBAT is, but everything still works. Or your LEDs, right? No, the one thing you have to solder on this copter is one of the most important things. So I'm not really sure that this copter qualifies as like a ready-to-fly, that someone with no skill whatsoever could use as a springboard into the hobby. As far as the overall build quality of the copter goes, I don't have any major complaints. I do have one small complaint, which is we've got the arms held together by this plate on top here. This is a carbon fiber plate, and it holds the arms together. But you can see that there's nothing sandwiching that on the bottom. And so there's I would feel that this was a better design if we had a plate sandwiching it on the bottom, because as it is, this top plate here is going to take some stress, and maybe, I don't know. It does have a metal brace here, you can kind of see right here, so that's an aluminum brace in addition to the carbon, and it's possible that this is just me being sort of overly picky, and that in practice it doesn't matter. But my first thought when I saw this was that I always like to see joints like this sandwiched, so that if you were to get stress this direction, sort of pushing down in the center and out. And when is that going to happen to your quadcopter, right? All the time. In response to that stress, I like to see something on both tension and compression so that we're sandwiching the joint. As long as we're down here, take a look at this battery pad here. And you can see, very nice that they've done this. This is to prevent these screw heads from damaging your battery. And I've seen some copters where they give you a kind of a pad like this, but then it is some sort of open cell foam, and it actually just compresses and it doesn't really do anything. In this case, this is a very nice, dense rubber. It's actually similar to the pad that was on the bottom of the QQ190 RTF, and I really liked that one as well. It is a dense, it's kind of a sticky rubber. It's not super sticky, but that actually doesn't matter because, as you can see, your battery strap is going to be cutting across it. The battery is not really going to be contacting it very much. The battery strap would be improved if it was one of the battery straps with the rubberized finish. I don't use this kind of battery strap anymore. okay, the kind with just the regular slippery finish, I always use a battery strap with a rubberized finish. Now, if you're using something like Velcro or some kind of other fastener to hold your batteries on, that's a different story. But in my case, the solution that I prefer is to use a battery strap with a rubberized finish, and then it holds the battery really well. I said this in the live stream, and it bears repeating here. I'm normally not a fan of XT60s that are directly connected to the board. And the reason I don't like that is that the solder joint here, it gets stressed when you unplug and unplug the battery on a daily basis, or in a crash when the battery ejects. And solder it's not terribly structural. It can be used in a structural way if you do it right, but it's kind of brittle and it can get stressed, cracks over time, and eventually your XT60 breaks off, or the fiberglass board itself breaks off, right? In this case, though, FlyPro has done about as good a job with this as I think you can do. You can see here that in addition to, you've got these big solder joints, of course, but then they've also got a metal wire passing through this channel. It's a little hard to get it on camera. You can see it right there. This wire passes all the way around the bottom of the XT60 and is soldered in here. So we've got an additional reinforcement here to prevent there being a single point of leverage against these solder joints. So that's nice. And additionally, they've sandwiched it here between the PDB/ESC plate and the arms here. So these arms are sandwiching it in here and providing a little bit of additional reinforcement. So if you're going to direct connect your XT60, I think this is about as good of a job as you can do. The copter comes with 2300 kV motors, which I think is a fine choice for a general purpose build. People who may not know already what kind of props they want to run can use a 2300 kV motor, and they can experiment with everything from 2 blades to 4 blades, and go to 6 blades if you like. At 2300 kV, these motors are not going to draw so much current that they're going to damage the ESCs or really just stress the battery excessively. Whereas if you put like an aggressive 3-blade or a 4-blade plop, aggressive 3-blade or a 4-blade plop, whereas if you put like an aggressive 3-blade or a 4-blade prop onto a 2600 kV motor, you can get current draw that is maybe excessive, or at the very least you'll damage your batteries or have really short flight times. On the other hand, for a racing copter, I feel like 2300 kV is no longer the gold standard. And when the motto of this copter is the fastest or nothing, I'm not sure that 2300 kV is really doing that slogan justice. I think that fastest speeds these days are going to be had on higher kV motors with lighter props, spinning those props faster. And the additional side benefit of that is for general purpose or freestyle flying, that makes a very tunable copter as well. I am coming to the conclusion that 2600 kV on light props is like the best. Now, I say that from the perspective of I'm not a hardcore racer, and if you see that there are like hardcore like ANUB and you know all the hardcore racers, Brain Drain, whatever they're doing, you should just do what they're doing. Don't listen to me. But I don't actually know what gear they're running. If you in the comments can tell me what the top racers, guys like Minchan and ANUB and Brain Drain, the people who are placing, what are they running? I don't think they're running 2300 kV. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. The ESCs came with a semi-recent version of BL Heli on them. I don't know, 14.5 or 14.6. I don't remember exactly what it was. They are BL Heli ESCs, not BL Heli S. So I went ahead and flashed them to multi-shot. And the easiest way to flash them to multi-shot is to use the BL Heli GUI Chrome app, because it includes the multi-shot firmware built in. You just select it from a pull-down menu and hit flash. There's no need to download it from Dropbox and all that nonsense you normally have to do if you want to flash multi-shot to a BL Heli ESC. The copter also came with Clean Flight installed on it, and I kind of make a face about that. There's nothing wrong with Clean Flight. But honestly, for racing, I mean, these days I think the racers are really running, they're running race flight. A lot of them are running. But if you're going to run clean flight, you should run beta flight instead. I feel like that's a more high-performance option. And if this is a high-performance copter, the first thing you're going to do when you get it is you're going to flash it to beta flight. Now, I hinted at this earlier, but the single most sort of fiddly and annoying thing about the build was getting the stack together. It's the same thing that bugged me about the Armadillo, and maybe I'm just old or bad at that kind of build. But for me, having to get all the pieces together and get all the screws in was a little bit annoying. On the other hand, you do have an awesome THUNDERCATS copter when you're done. So, okay, so that's fine. The biggest part of it that bugged me, I think, was getting the camera mounted. The camera, you have to install the bracket to the top plate, and then you have to get the top plate onto the side plates. And once you know how to do it, I think it's probably a little easier. But the first time you do it, it's definitely a little tedious. The advice I would give to you if you're building this is the camera will slip into the bracket and slip out. So maybe put the thing together and then mount the bracket. When I was doing the build, I kind of forgot that you can just pop the camera out. It'll be held in there by spring tension, and then when you're finally all done putting it together, you can go ahead and put the screws in the side. I kind of forgot that, and so I was going through a lot of trouble to get these top screws in because the camera was in my way. I could have just taken it out. As far as I could tell, there was no way to mount these screws with the nuts on the underside because the nuts got in the way of the camera. You can see how much clearance you've got there. The nuts got in the way of the camera being able to move forward and backward. So as near as I can tell, the nuts have to go on top. And the problem with that then is, let's say you're going to mount like a high-def camera, like a GoPro Session or something. If it's going to sit down inside of these sidewalls, these nuts are going to be in the way. You're going to need some kind of foam or something. So fine, but you're not going to be able to just directly hard mount it because those screws are in the way. Getting the LED board installed was also a real hassle. It seemed like it didn't have enough clearance. It kept rubbing up against these nuts. Depending on which side I put it in. And I just couldn't get it all to go together until I just really squeezed it. And I think when I did that, this LED doesn't light up anymore. I think I broke it. So I'm not sure that the clearances are correct here. If I was more confident about where the traces were on this board, I might have just filed or cut away some of the board, but I didn't want to cut a trace, so I just did my best to sort of shoehorn it all in there, and I think I broke it in the process. I am really pleased that they've included a buzzer. A lot of these ready-to-fly copters don't include a buzzer, and I think a buzzer is an essential part of a copter. It has so many uses, from syncing up your black box to reminding you that the gyro has calibrated and you can take off now, to just finding the copter when you crash in the tall grass. I want all my copters to have buzzers. I accept that some copters don't come with buzzers, and I just live with it, but I like that they have included the buzzer on this one. The copter comes with this Crazy Pony linear antenna. This is the FPV antenna, and you're going to want to replace this with a circular polarized antenna. Definitely. These are okay for some conditions, but they're kind of unpredictable as to when they're going to be good and when they're going to be bad. And it's not just range or obstructions. I don't know what it is. I've had a scenario where I was flying with this antenna. I've flown around my house with one of these antennas, and it did okay. But then I had another scenario where I was flying a soccer field, just the short length of a soccer field away, and for some reason, I was getting crazy dropouts. The other thing is that these linear antennas are not as good at avoiding interference between pilots. And that's true. I'm told that's true, even if you're not doing the left-hand, right-hand, left-hand, right-hand. Most fields I've been at, everybody just flies right-hand polarization. And even then, you're going to have less separation with these linear antennas. So it's not just good for your range, it's also being a good citizen to the other pilots at the field to put a circular polarized antenna on here. The copter comes with a 2.8 millimeter lens, and of course my preference would be to include like a 2.5 or even one of those nice Victoza GoPro lenses that I've talked about on my channel. And then the single biggest complaint I have about this copter, and that is, where do you put the freaking receiver? I don't know. Where does it go? There's nowhere to put it on the inside of this stack. And certainly not a standard size receiver like an X4R or an XSR. I mean, I just don't know. There's just no clearance in there to slip it in there. You maybe could lay it flat right here, but then it would be sitting right on top of the video transmitter, and that gets hot, right? You don't want to put your receiver right on top of there. It'll cause the video transmitter to heat up because it's blocking airflow, and it'll overheat the receiver, and that's not good. What, are you going to put some foam tape on top of your video transmitter? That's great. That's all it needs is insulation. And I just don't know where else to get it. I really don't. I can't think of any way to fit an XSR or an X4R on here other than just like stick it to the side, but you don't want to do that. Maybe mount it on top, but I hate the idea of an externally mounted receiver like that. I mean, you've got this beautiful, and it is beautiful, look at it. It's machined aluminum, and it's got this beautiful build with this compact stack, right? all completely wonderfully integrated, and they didn't really seem to have given you anywhere to mount a receiver. Or maybe I'm just missing it. I can't think where you would put a receiver. Could you get it underneath? Could you get it in this little slot here? I mean, maybe, but gosh, I don't know. There's nowhere good. So what I've heard of people doing is some people can get it vertically behind the camera. And that's if you're using like a tiny micro receiver, like Furious FPV has one and FreeSky has one, and I've been stealing those off of my QX90s. Those little S-Bus receivers from the QX90. They don't have great range, and I wouldn't recommend it for full-time use, but just to get in the air, I think that might be what I'm going to end up trying to do. I mean, all of the things I've mentioned about this copter so far are not like absolute deal breakers. They're little nits that I pick, you know, because that's my job and that's my personality and that's what I do. But for me, this one I think is the one that comes closest to just being a real deal breaker. And if I had one suggestion for the guys back at FlyPro, it would be to, well, either you got to put in your instruction manual where to put the receiver. And I looked at the exploded diagram. They have a very nice manual. I looked at the exploded diagram for the copter, didn't see anywhere to put the receiver in there. And in the official assembly video for the copter, they're using a great big honkin' PWM receiver. I didn't finish the video to see where they put that thing, but if that's the modality that they're sort of targeting, then that's no good for racing. Okay, well there you go. There is your first look at the FlyPro HobbyWow XJaguar. Sort of not quite ready to fly, but also not really an ARF kit either. Easy to assemble with just minimal soldering. Racing quadcopter. I'm going to be doing tuning, of course, and flight videos, and as I said earlier, a wrap-up of all of these copters coming up in the next couple weeks on the channel. But for now, thanks for watching. Happy flying.